Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. I am super excited to be here with all of you today. This morning, as I was looking at my LinkedIn feed, I noticed that a lot of the content there is about some sort of career advice or tips for success. And it's not just LinkedIn. These days, everywhere you look around, whether it is different social media platforms, blog posts, or all the recycled WhatsApp messages. You know what I'm talking about, right? All of that has some sort of common wisdom, a lot of it going around us. Yet, when it comes to our own careers, we still seem to be searching for answers. Isn't that the case? Why is that even with so much advice, we still are searching for answers? I don't know about you, but when I look at some of this advice, I feel like a lot of that is very cliched. Some of that is incomplete and not very actionable, and sometimes simply plain wrong. So today, I'm going to share 7 such myths and cliches and share an alternate point of view based on my experiences and life stories. Some of what you hear today may surprise you and go against everything that you heard until now. I'm not saying this is exactly what you should follow. I am going to merely provide a different perspective, and I'll encourage all of you to experiment with these and see what works and doesn't work in your own situation. So let's begin. The first one here, fake it till you make it. Let's do a show of hands actually. How many of you heard this advice when it comes to confidence? Everyone pretty much, right? I think this is not only one of the most popular cliches of all times, it's a potentially dangerous one. The reason I say that is we hear a lot of people, even very successful people, talk about imposter syndrome. That is coming from years and years of conditioning from bad advice like this. If you fake something, of course you're going to feel like an imposter. And oh, by the way, you're not fooling anyone with that. People are pretty smart, right? They can actually smell the bullshit from a mile away. Right? Plus, if you're that good at fooling people, why would you be here? You would be in Hollywood. So, we're not doing ourselves any good by faking. So clearly, do not fake it till you make it. So then what is the alternative? How do we build our confidence? In order to answer that question, let's actually double-click into 2 topics that are very essential to everything that we do in our lives. Those 2 topics are courage and confidence. We often conflate these 2 and use them interchangeably sometimes. But in reality, they're quite different. Let's actually start by defining what those are. Confidence is the feeling of self-assurance that comes from one's appreciation of one's own abilities. That's a pretty straightforward definition. But the key words to remember there are one's appreciation of one's own ability. It's not about somebody else telling you you're good at something. It's not a pat on the back from your boss. When it comes to confidence, it truly has to come from within. Courage, on the other hand, is your mental strength to face fears or difficulties. So you need courage to face your fears and do something. And that act of doing something is what will help you realize your potential and help you understand your own abilities, and therefore build your confidence. So courage leads to confidence, right? Confidence is the end result of taking courageous actions, not the starting point. I can tell you from my own career experience, this is exactly how it works. In 1998, I joined Cisco to work in routing space. A couple of years into that, my boss came to me one day and said, "Hey Vijaya, I've been asked to lead this security business unit that we are newly forming. Would you like to come join?" After thinking about it for a minute, I said yes and jumped into security. What I didn't realize back then, but looking back on it now, it's very apparent to me, that was me being courageous when I said yes. Because I didn't clearly have the confidence back then that I had what it took to be successful in this new field. Because security was fairly new and emerging, and I didn't know anything about security at the time. On top of that, I was also nervous about giving up what was working just fine up until then and start something new. But I'm so glad I said yes. And I was courageous because it turned out to be one of the best career decisions of my life. I not only survived, but I thrived in security. And over the next several years, as I kept saying yes to more and more things like that, I gained more experience and my confidence increased along with that as well. So, what can you do to build your own confidence? Starting tomorrow, heck, starting today, right after this conference, if something comes your way, an opportunity to work on a new project, an opportunity to give a speech, write a blog, or something you yourself wanted to do for a long time, say yes before your inner voice starts creeping in and tells you, you really don't have the time to do it, or you don't have the skills to do it, or whatever your inner voice tells you. Because once you say yes, human tendency is we'll figure out a solution for it. I promise you, you will figure that out. So, we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but if you only remember one thing from this entire talk, this is it, which is confidence comes from taking courageous actions, not by faking. Because what we just talked about, that is a much more practical way to think about how to build confidence, and it doesn't involve any faking and doesn't make you feel uncomfortable in your own skin. In fact, this is so important to me and to all of us, I think, that I want all of you guys to repeat after me. Indulge. Indulge me in this. Confidence comes from taking courageous action. Say it. Not by faking. Awesome. Thank you so much for humoring me with that. All right. Number 2. I was at a women's conference once. It was a seminar of some kind about body language. The facilitator of that seminar was really entertaining and engaging, and she had a lot of things to tell about what we women do wrong in terms of the way we talk, right? The way we end our sentences in an uptone, the way we sit by taking very little space rather than, taking up a lot of physical space like men do, the way we walk, the way we stand, lots of things. And she also talked about, ways in which we could do things differently to appear more powerful. Now, there are a lot of good nuggets in that talk, and I don't have a problem with any of that advice in itself. But my concern is a potential negative side effect that comes from this line of thinking, that as a woman you should do that, as a woman this, as a woman that. What happens with that is, the more you think about everything from that gender-centric narrative, the more it becomes a central part of our identity. Over a period of time, it gets to us to an extent that we start looking everything from that same angle. To the point, if something doesn't go our way, like if we don't get a job or a role that we've been offered, it is natural for us to think and jump to the conclusion that maybe that's because I'm a woman. Now, I'm not saying gender inequality or gender bias doesn't exist in workplace. Not at all. That is very real, in some places more than others. And I'm definitely not blind to that. Because when I reflect on my own career, I can think of 2 instances that come to mind immediately. After delivering some really high-value results for the company, I'm talking major accomplishments like turning around an underperforming business or launching a new product and creating a new product category and bringing millions of dollars of revenue in the very first quarter. Things of that caliber and standards. I still didn't get the promotion or the role that I deserved. And it went to some men who were my peers, because all my peers were men. At the same time, there were also many other instances where I got the promotion and I got the role, and my peers that were men had to report to me, even though probably they had many more years of experience than I did at the time. My point is, in life, things sometimes go our way, and sometimes they don't, regardless of our gender. In those times when things didn't go my way, had I thought about it as, hey, that's maybe because I'm a woman, I didn't get that role or a promotion, that would have impacted me much more deeply and prevented me from doing other great things and eventually being successful at some other places and times. As they say, life is 10% what happens to us and 90% how we react to it. So based on my experiences, I came to the conclusion and belief that even though in the short term there may be ups and downs because of these inequalities and biases that we talked about, in the long run, your talent, skills, and capabilities are what will prevail. So, from a practical standpoint, for our own sanity, well-being, and long-term success, let us try not to over-rotate on the gender narrative. We are better off putting our energy and focus on what we bring to the table as human beings and individuals first and foremost. We are so much more than our gender. So let us not be defined by it. Let us be defined by our capabilities instead. Thank you. Number 3. Besides gender, there are so many other things that make us unique. Maybe we have a long and strange name. Maybe we have a different accent. We look different or dress different, whatever the case may be. Don't think whatever that makes you unique is a disadvantage to you. And don't let any kind of advice or thinking like that lead you down the wrong path. Throughout my career, when I looked around, I often found myself to be the only one that looked and sounded different from everybody else around me. Happens all the time, even today. I was at a CISO conference 2 days ago. Same thing. Looked around the room, everybody was different than how I looked or sounded. Initially, that used to bother me when I was early in my career. But as I went through and saw more and more evidence that, in fact, this may not be actually that bad, maybe it's actually helping me stand out, I started to think about it differently. I very vividly remember the first time I came to this realization. I was in a large room, a large meeting with many executives. It was some sort of a business review with our newly appointed senior vice president. I was a very junior member of the team at the time, was sitting way in the back. There were lots of discussion, Q&A, and people were interacting throughout the meeting. At one point, I raised my hand and I said, asked some question or made a comment. There was silence in the room. Everybody turned back and it's like, who is this person asking this question? And after that meeting, a lot of those people actually remembered me by name or what I actually said. That's when I realized, look, this is actually not a bad thing. It's great to be different from others in many regards. So how can you take advantage of your own uniqueness? The best thing you can do, first of all, is reframe your thinking. Rather than worrying about, not sticking out, be glad that whatever makes you unique is helping you stand out. It's a slight reframing and different choice of words, but that could be super powerful. So whatever makes you unique, it's a feature, not a bug. Okay? So don't try to fix it. Embrace it and let your unique attributes work for you to your advantage. Another classic one that we hear all the time. It's all about who you know. Is it really? I don't think so. I have two problems with this. First is it makes you think that if you know the right people, perhaps things will come easily to you. And second, the opposite of it, which is if you don't know the right people, maybe you're screwed and there is no hope for you. I actually think both of those are not true. And advice like this can actually take you down the wrong path. Because I see some people overly invested in building their network, sometimes at the cost of other things. I'm not saying don't build your network, but that alone won't do it. So what is the right answer here? I wish I had an easy answer for you on this. I don't. Because as they say, there is no elevator to success. You just have to take the stairs. That means we have to put in years of hard work and produce consistently great results every single time. Build a very strong track record. And on top of that, develop some solid relationships for us to ultimately get recognized for our work. At least for me, that's what I had to do. And if you focus on doing that, sometimes you may get calls from people that you know. And sometimes you may get calls from people that you don't know, complete strangers, like it happened in my case. I have a lot of people in my network, some amazing people. But I didn't get any of the roles that I got through those people. When I got a call from Airbnb, I didn't know a single person in the company. Same was the case with my previous company, Lookout. So just know that it is not all about who you know, and focus instead on building your reputation. And give people that know you, as well as people that don't know you, a great reason to call you. Number 5. Here's another myth that we come across often, right? In order to have a great career, you need to know where you want to be in 5 years and plan accordingly. I mean, this day and age, when things are changing so rapidly, is it even feasible? Is it even realistic to know where you want to be in 5 years? And even if you made a 5-year plan, chances are that it will get obsolete pretty soon. So if you don't know where you want to be in 5 years, don't torture yourself with it at all. In fact, it may be good for you because it will keep you nimble and open to new possibilities. So what's the alternative again? Take one step at a time. It's that simple. At each step of your career, stop to assess where you are and where you want to go next for your next role. That means you really have to stop and understand what skill set, experiences, and talents that you've already acquired, and where do you actually have gaps. And we have to be honest with ourselves when we do that assessment, and find the next assignment and opportunity that will give you those specific skill set. And because you're not writing a 5-year plan, it should be fairly straightforward, right? Because you're only worried about what I have today, what do I need to acquire tomorrow, and that's it. So that is what I had to do at every step of my career. I'll give you a couple of examples. After running engineering for many years, when I stopped to think about and said, hey, what's next for me? Where do I go from here? I realized that I've never thought of myself just as an engineering leader. I've always thought of myself as a broader business leader. And I've had a lot of exposure to different business aspects by working closely with cross-functional teams. But I never really had a formal role to lead some sort of a business team. So in my next role, I took on product management in addition to running engineering, and therefore I can get the broader general management experience. After working for a large company for many years, I felt like for my next role, I really need to round out my skills by taking my experience and applying it to smaller sized companies. So that's exactly what I did. Deliberately go from large company to medium size, and from there to startup. And each time I did that, literally I wrote down what skills and experience am I looking for in my next step, what kind of roles and what kind of companies will give me those opportunities. So the key to building solid career is to keep layering those bricks one at a time. If you do that, you leverage your existing experience, and then you build on top of it based on what's appropriate at the time and stretch yourself in new directions. Number 6, we are often told feedback is a gift, and we should accept all feedback unconditionally. It is true that feedback is a gift. This advice is not incorrect, but it is incomplete. Because while we accept all feedback with a simple thank you and a smile, it's not necessary that we act on all of that feedback. There are many cases where it doesn't make sense to act on the feedback. I'll share with you a few of those. First, be very skeptical of any feedback that you get from people that you've met recently and somebody that hasn't actually seen you operate in your full context. So they have a very limited view of you, and they give feedback specifically based on that. In those cases, take that feedback, vet it with 2 or 3 other people that know you, and if it still makes sense, sure. The second case is where the feedback itself is valid, but it probably is not very authentic to who you are, or it goes against your values. And especially if it is not aligned with your values, completely feel free to ignore that feedback. And the third case is where Feedback is valid, but based on where you are in your career at that time, it may not be aligned with your career goals. This happened recently in my organization with one of the individuals. When I saw this person in action, based on their skills and expertise, I felt that this person could take on a broader role and become a tech lead. But during those conversations, I found out that the person's career aspirations were different. They wanted to focus on a specific area and go much deeper instead. So if you have a case like that where your career goals don't align, it's perfectly fine to have that conversation with your manager or whoever gives you that feedback and set their expectations correctly and say, hey, this is why I'm not taking this feedback. This is where I want to go. So feedback is truly a gift, but we don't use all the gifts we get, do we? I'm sure you tucked away that sweater that you got from your aunt for Christmas. So this is the same. Some feedback is best tucked away and not used. Last but not least, once again, we're all often told we have to treat others as we like to be treated ourselves. But in reality, I find that we treat others a lot better than we treat ourselves. Yes? Can you imagine the negative chatter that goes in our head sometimes? I mean, very easily we tell ourselves that we suck at something. We are idiots, morons, and worse, losers. We all do that sometimes. But when it comes to others, we don't use words like that. Even when we give feedback to our worst enemy, we probably pick the right words, try to be very objective, and try not to hurt their feelings. But boy, we can get really nasty with ourselves. So how do we change that narrative? What can we do about it? I have to admit, this is something that I'm still working on myself. Because if you're somebody that is always trying to push yourself and try to improve every time, every day you do something, it's very easy to fall in the trap of being very self-critical and very hard on yourself. And it's a very hard thing to change. I found one technique to be somewhat helpful, but I'm still practicing it. That is, rather than generalize whatever the issue is, if you deconstruct that into smaller components and make it really small, tangible piece, you can find a fix for that much more easily and not be unreasonable to yourself. The other day I was talking about this to somebody and they said, you're talking about it like an engineer. Yes, that's what engineers do, right? Take a problem and deconstruct it and figure out what the solution is. This is exactly like that. Let's take an example. Let's say you tell yourself that you're not good at cooking. Rather than generally say, hey, I suck at cooking, maybe think about what makes you think that way. And once you think about it, perhaps you could come to the realization that maybe I don't get the proportions of ingredients right all the time. If that is the case, you can then follow a tried and tested recipe much more closely and then fix that. I know this is a simplistic example, but I'm sure you can see the applications of it in other areas. So, in reality, what we need is to be kind to ourselves and treat yourself like you treat others. So we talked about a lot of things today. I will leave you guys with this one final thought, which is regardless of which advice you follow, ultimately, at the end of the day, as long as you make sure you're better today than the person you were yesterday, if you just focus on that and make that happen, you will just turn out fine. Thank you so much for being such a great audience today.